What's up, YouTube? I am getting into the final chapter in this series. I decided to do this series called Unshaken. I wanted to show you guys about this character, Daniel, in the Bible, who has pretty much been in a hostile culture throughout all of the chapters that we read, but he still maintained bold faith and obedience to God. It is packed with a lot of drama if you pay attention to the other chapters that I've read so far. And I pretty much want to get into this last chapter, which is the Lion's Den. I know we've probably all heard of this story, but that is why I decided to do this 6-part series. And I really do hope that you've enjoyed this, and I hope it also encourages you to go ahead and read the rest of the chapters in Daniel. But for now, for this series, I'm going to stop here. So let's go ahead and recap the end of chapter 5. So basically at the end of chapter 5, we had King Belshazzar, and Daniel pretty much read or interpreted an inscription that was on the wall, which basically told King Belshazzar that his time was up in the kingdom. He was deemed deficient. And then we saw that Darius the Mede received the kingdom of Belshazzar at the age of 62. And that's literally where the chapter ends. So I want to go ahead and get into chapter 6, which is based on the Lion's Den. So I got to go ahead and see what happens next. All right. So chapter 6, verse 1. Darius decided to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom stationed throughout the realm, and over them 3 administrators, including Daniel. These satraps would be accountable to them so that the king would not be defrauded. Daniel distinguished himself above the administrators and satraps because he had an extraordinary spirit, so the king planned to set him over the whole realm. The administrators and satraps therefore kept trying to find a charge against Daniel regarding the kingdom. But they couldn't find no charge or corruption, for he was trustworthy, and no negligence or corruption was found in him. Then these men said, "We will never find any charge against this Daniel unless we find something against him concerning the law of his God." So, for whatever reason, they wanted to find some charge against Daniel. They wanted him to be corrupt. They wanted him to be negligent. But my boy wasn't any of that, okay? And they said the only way that we're going to get this man is if we find something against him concerning the law of his God, right? So, let's move on. Verse 6 says, "So the administrators and satraps went together to the king and said to him, 'May King Darius live forever. All the administrators of the kingdom, the prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an edict that for 30 days, anyone who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den.'" So here we go. They know Daniel ain't about to worship no other God but the Most High God, the God of the heavens, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. They know he's not about to worship anybody else. But verse 8 says, "Therefore your majesty establish the edict and sign the document, so that as a law of the Medes and Persians, it is irrevocable and cannot be changed." So King Darius signed and written the edict. Now, when Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he went into his house. The windows in his upstairs room opened toward Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees, prayed, and gave thanks to God, just as he had done before. So this is Daniel's response to such an edict. He didn't get mad. He didn't react. It says he went into his house. He got on his knees, prayed 3 times a day, and he thanked God. And he probably thanked God because he knew God was going to deliver him. But that's besides the point. It says, "Then these men went as a group and found Daniel petitioning and imploring his God. So they approached the king and asked about his edict. 'Didn't you sign an edict that for 30 days any person who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown in the lion's den?'" So look at them conspiring. Just because they see him worshiping and praising his God, they have an issue. So these men were basically being snitched. They was like, "Oh, King Darius, we have somebody who's violating that edict that you just wrote." So it says, "The king answered, 'As a law of the Medes and Persians, the order stands and is irrevocable.' Then they replied to the king, 'Daniel, one of the Judean exiles, has ignored you, the king, and the edict you signed, for he prays 3 times a day. As soon as the king heard about this, he was very displeased. He set his mind on rescuing Daniel and made every effort until sundown to deliver him. Then these men went together to the king and said to him, "You know, your majesty, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no edict or ordinance the king establishes can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you." So they threw him in the lion's den. They said, "You know what? Whoever you praying to 3 times a day, whoever the God is that you're imploring to, I hope he can do his thing for you and rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. Can you imagine that? So not only do you get thrown into the lion's den, but there's a stone so that there is no way out for you. Okay. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing in regard to Daniel could be changed. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and he could not sleep. Obviously, the king didn't want to do it, but because of the edict that he wrote and the fact that it was irrevocable, there was nothing he can do. And he was so bothered. He went home. He couldn't eat. Nothing was brought to him. He couldn't sleep. So he was in distress too. Verse 19 says, "At the first light of the dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he reached the den, he cried out in anguish to Daniel. 'Daniel, servant of the living God,' the king said, 'has your God, whom you continually serve, been able to rescue from the lions?' Then Daniel spoke with the king. 'May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they haven't harmed me, for I was found innocent before him, and also before you, your majesty. I have not done harm.'" Period. And that's the God we serve. An angel was sent down to shut the mouths of the lion because Daniel was found innocent. There was nothing wrong. And I seen a post this morning that said that when somebody does you wrong, don't get revenge. Don't react. Let God get it for you, because he's seen it. He's seen that those men was trying to make him out to be somebody who he was not. And therefore he was saved even when he was thrown in the lion's den. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to take Daniel out of the den. When Daniel was brought up from the den, he was found to be unharmed, for he trusted in his God. The king then gave the command, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lion's den, they, their children, and their wives. They had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. So let's just look at that twist of events. Daniel was innocent, but these men wanted to find him guilty for something, anything. And that got Daniel into the lion's den. But God knew that he was innocent and sent an angel to save him. But guess what? The story didn't end there. Daniel was able to come out unscathed, unharmed. And guess what? The people who made all of those false claims against him went in. And before they could fully get in, it says the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. And guess who had to suffer because of those men? It says they, their children, and their wives. So it's so important to be mindful of the things that you do, because it may not just affect yourself. You may affect your family by the actions that you choose to take. So be very, very mindful of doing malicious and evil things. All right, moving right along. Verse 25. Then King Darius wrote to those of every people, nation, and language who live on the whole earth. May your prosperity abound. I issue a decree that in all my royal dominion, people must tremble in fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his dominion has no end. He rescues and delivers. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth, for he has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And that is the end of Daniel chapter 6. This chapter goes to show you, or all of these chapters that I've read in this series goes to show you, that Daniel had unfakeable and unshakable faith. Look at this. When the king wrote this edict, Daniel didn't react. He didn't panic. He didn't get fearful. He went up to his room in his home, got on his knees, and prayed 3 times a day and gave God thanks. God honors consistency in private and courage in public, because guess what? He could have been like, you know what? All right, my bad. I'm sorry. Let me just bow down and worship your gods or whatever it is that you want me to do. All right, my bad. I'm sorry. Let me do it. Let me change. That boy did not bow down. In each situation in this chapter, you can see where he had a choice to react a certain way, but he chose to be obedient. And God also was kind enough to rescue him from the lion's den. Now, as for the people who conspired against him, it's important to recognize and know that, again, like I said before, be very careful of what you do and how you conspire against people, especially if you know in your heart that they're innocent and that they have nothing to do with whatever it is that you're trying to pair them with, because the consequences that can come from that may not just affect you, but it can fall on your spouse, your children, other family members. So just be careful of the decisions that you make in today's day and age. God bless you, and I hope that you enjoyed this series on Daniel.